everyone, and welcome back to the relatively obscure and unlikely to be adapted Comic Vault. Today, we're going to take a look at an entire run of comics, a 25-issue run from 2008 to 2010, so right around the time that I started the channel, that Geekvolution began, and it's Guardians of the Galaxy. And yes, that Guardians of the Galaxy, not the early 90s set in the 30th or 31st century Guardians, although this book is connected to that and inspired by it, and is not a stealing the name like Defenders or just happens to be called that. It is related to all of that, and I'll get into why and how here in a little bit. This was requested by the Day Ghost on Patreon, so thanks very much to the Day Ghost, and I gotta mention that I have actually shot this video already and somehow lost the footage, and I'm having to re-record it now, and it was days before I realized the footage was missing. I sat down to edit this video and did not have the footage, and so it's been a while now since I looked at this material, so I'm gonna do my level best to be as detailed as I can, although I'm sure I will forget some stuff because I read an entire 25 issues of comics, an entire run. It's been a little while, but also I want this to be somewhat broad strokes anyway, because it's a lengthy run, and I mean, not a super lengthy run, but it's more issues of comics than I usually talk about, so I'll hit the broad strokes, but I want to mention that I said I'll hit the broad strokes in the previous video, and it actually ended up being an hour long. I don't know if it's going to be that long this time, and hoping that maybe I can streamline it a little bit, but hopefully I don't leave out any major stuff. So anyway, I wanted to apologize, especially to the Day Ghost, that he's not going to get to see the original video I shot on this when it was a little bit more fresh in my mind. But anyway, I will do my level best and jump back into this and try to make it fun and interesting. So as always with the Comic Vault, or at least as normally, generally speaking, this is what I do with the Vault. I'm going to give you a breakdown of the series in case you haven't read it, so I'm going to spoil everything. And so if you don't want to know anything about the series and you want to look at it before I talk about it, if you have a subscription to Marvel Unlimited, you can read it there. This is actually, I'm sure the trades are not hard to get, although I've not seen them. I don't know if they're in print right now. This is, of course, the series that most inspired and most heavily influences the movies. And so I imagine Marvel keeps these in print, but I didn't look. I'm not sure about that. But it is available there. The single issues are actually pretty expensive and difficult to get your hands on at a reasonable price. I actually have them currently in my flea market booth. I didn't read those issues for this. I have Marvel Unlimited, so I read it digitally. But I recently acquired a collection that happened to have those issues in it and didn't realize what they were worth. Because the first issue includes the first appearance of this permutation of this team, of this iteration, it's an $80 issue, which I didn't realize, and a number of the issues beyond that are worth quite a bit more than cover. So it's like a $200 set if you ever run into it. I'm selling mine for, of course, a little bit less than that, and it's just in my flea market booth in Topeka right now, so I'm not advertising that or trying to get you guys to bid on it anywhere or anything, but I'm just mentioning that I was kind of surprised. It was kind of exciting in the middle of reading this to run into those issues, and then I found out what they were worth, and I was really surprised by that. But anyway, so I want to talk a little bit, I guess, first of all, about the flavor of this and what it's like versus the movies and how much of a similar experience it is and isn't. So, like I said, this is the first time that these characters come together and are called the Guardians of the Galaxy. And the reason they put the team together in the first place is to try to prevent big reality-shattering events like Annihilation and like the Phalanx thing that happened just before that, before they happen, because reality is in trouble. The seams are starting to starting to shed a little bit, it's starting to unravel, and it's the universe itself is getting very fragile, and if the wrong weapon is set off, or, the wrong cosmic event happens, it could unravel all of reality. And that's indeed what the series ends up being about. There's a lot of complex, complicated, and I would even say convoluted time travel stuff that happens in this, a lot of different versions of different characters from different timelines that show up and warn that the timeline is falling apart, and that the version of their reality that they know is gone now. That happens with a character named, I think, Starhawk, who comes from the future, but a future that doesn't exist anymore, and was a man initially, but something about time and history being altered transforms him into a woman. A lot of quirky, out there, crazy stuff happens in this, and some of it's very difficult to get your mind around. But anyway, so this is the reason that the team forms, and Peter Quill decides, I'm going to get together some of my friends that I was fighting with and dealing with during Annihilation, and see if we can all work together to stop these kinds of things from happening. It's not exactly the same thing as like the point of Civil War, of like Age of Ultron, where it's like we have to stop these things from happening, or we have to decide whether it's more important to stop things from happening or deal with them after the fact because of that whole pesky freedom versus security issue. It isn't that. It's that if we're not talking about curbing anybody's freedoms or necessarily stopping like bad people from doing bad things and not giving people the benefit of the doubt. It's not that whole thing. That's not thematically what this is about. This is more if we don't stop messing with... It's almost more of an environmental thing in a way. If we don't stop messing with space-time, we're going to lose the universe. We're going to lose our grander environment. And so that's what Peter Quill is doing. And he puts together... Yes, the team that we see in the first Guardians movie, plus several other characters, and some of the characters that you would expect to be prominently featured here based on the movie are not as important as other characters who either aren't even in the movies or haven't been utilized as majorly in the movies. So I'll break down the characters and tell you a little bit about how they're the same and different. So Peter Quill, as a lot of you guys know, of course, is different background-wise than in the movie, because he's not fully human, although in the movies we find out that he's not either. His dad's a planet. In this, his dad is a prince or a king, I think a king of another race, and his name is Jason, and they opted to go kind of a weirder direction in the movies, which is fun. Doesn't completely work, I don't think, ultimately. At least some of the issues with some of the things with Ego don't ultimately make a lot of sense to me, but I like that idea a lot. I always thought that was cool. And but he knows already right away here anyway that he's not fully human, although I don't know if he knows who his dad is in this. It's not talked about. But anyway, so he is characterized kind of similarly, although I think somewhat inconsistently. I think the movies kind of streamlined his character and focused it more and made it a little bit clearer what's going on with him. But he still has kind of... He still has that like childish streak where he hasn't grown up fully. He's got a little bit of a lack of responsibility thing going on. His heart's in the right place. He wants to help people. He wants to do the right thing, but he's very impulsive and he's just immature. He doesn't know when to leap and when to look, and he has a tendency to be overconfident, but sometimes that also serves him well. But I think the book, because I say his heart's in the right place, I think the book sometimes treats him a little bit more anti-hero-ish, and sometimes treats him like a straight-up hero, and it's a little bit clearer in the movies where he falls on that and why he does illegal things and that kind of thing. In this, he seems to have sometimes more of an ends justifies the means thing. It's not that whole like bit of both thing at the end of Guardians where like he'll do things just for his own ends, and as long as it doesn't hurt people or hurt people too much, he'll just go steal things from people, and he's a little bit like Mal from Firefly. In this, it's not that until it is. Like, there are a couple of places where, like, I'm not sure if this is a guy that kills people or not. He seems to be, at the end of the day, okay with doing whatever he has to do for the greater good, kind of. Not in a real ominous way, but just as somebody is clearly really evil, he will maybe be okay with killing them, but I'm not completely sure where he lands on that. I sometimes struggle to get in his head. And there's a framing device, or not a framing device, but there's a device throughout this, I should mention, that makes it a little bit like Galactic The Office, where we will occasionally cut to interviews with different characters telling their point of view retroactively, so it's always after a thing has happened already, and some of those get kind of funny, and some of those are just expositionary, or expository, excuse me, and you kind of need them for that. But even with that, I don't feel like I fully get Peter Quill. Maybe on a second read I'd have a better sense of it, but that is one of my complaints about the book. And then Rocket Raccoon, interestingly, feels like a character who has already gone through his character arc through the movies, and he's where you would expect him to be after that. Like, he's already gone through his... And of course, I've not read Rocket Raccoon before this, so I don't know if he was more immature at one time and now he's kind of grown up a bit. But he feels like the guy who really should be the leader of this team, which is a lot of fun. I like Rocket in this a lot. Vernacular-wise, the way he talks, and his kind of his sarcastic sensibilities are a lot like they are in the movie, and I've got Bradley Cooper's voice in my head when I'm reading him, but he seems to have, if he ever needed to go through some soul-searching and figure out who he is, and if he had personal insecurities at some point, I'm not reading them here. I'm not seeing that. He doesn't really have a character arc in this. He seems to be kind of the voice of reason, and to some degree, and kind of the guy who's got it all figured out and knows what he's doing, and he kind of just humors Peter Quill a little bit because he put this team together and he's supposed to be the leader, but it seems like he really ought to be the leader. Also, his and Groot's relationship hasn't started before this, it doesn't seem like, so they seem to be getting to know each other in this and will be friends more later, and they get along fine, but it just doesn't seem like they knew each other much before this. Everybody is introduced to the I am Groot thing here. They're not used to hearing him say that. Nobody knows the language. There's like, I think there's like one character that knows it's a language and is like, oh, he's not actually saying I am Groot over and over again. He's saying something. He's got a language, but nobody actually knows the language, which is interesting. And I wonder, comic continuity-wise, when Rocket learns that and how, because he doesn't know it here. And then Gamora is here, and we don't do a ton with her. She is, and like, she's pretty consistently characterized with the Gamora that I'm familiar with in the Bendis run, where she's just kind of no-nonsense and sort of stoic, and more stoic than she is certainly in the movies. And but I don't have a whole lot to say about her because the book doesn't do a ton with her. Drax is a very different character, and if memory serves, not even quite the character that he used to be even pre this book, in Infinity Gauntlet and before that. I think something has happened to him and he's like kind of a new version of Drax, but I don't know if I'm right about that. I should pause here and say that if you've not read this, one of the things that makes it kind of difficult to get into this, for me anyway, and where it loses me in places, is that it is building so much on stuff that came before, just right before it, that even though there's some recapping and stuff, I'm not always totally with it. I feel like sometimes there's a prerequisite and it's not really written for me. I think it's difficult to just jump straight into this book to some degree, and I'd really be lost if I wasn't already familiar with these characters, I think. I needed that to grasp onto. So, like, if you know the movie Guardians, you can read this. If you know Marvel Guardians past this, like you've read Bendis stuff, but you just never got around to the original, then it's even more readable. But I think if you were to have come into this at this time, and this is all you read, it would be a little bit difficult to a little bit of a slog and a little bit difficult to get through, maybe. But anyway, so Drax is created to kill Thanos. So he literally is Drax the Destroyer, and he is. They keep referring to him in those interview sections as formerly human, and so I guess he was a human and he was recreated to kill Thanos. So he's like genetically programmed to do that. And he has done that now, and so now he's trying to find his place in the world. And so he's got this bond with Peter Quill, and he seems to really believe in Quill. And he's got a daughter who is Moondragon, who is believed to be dead. And then at some point, her lover, because they're lesbians, goes to rescue her from oblivion. This is all starting to come back to me. And we don't know if she's alive for sure, and then we discover there that she is. Right in the middle of this series, there's this period where all the characters branch off, and two sets of them go to two different kinds of hell. One set goes to Oblivion, and the other set goes to the negative zone. That's Peter Quill, and he fights something of a arch nemesis there. I think that's where Blast Air comes from, and then we keep using him later on. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So Drax is one of the more interesting characters in this, I think. He's like the movie version in that he will run at danger head first and isn't worried about anything, and is impulsive, but not for the same reason that Quill is, right? He doesn't have those insecurities. He's not worried about people liking him. He's not worried about people not trusting him as a leader and trying to do stuff before he's really ready to do them. He's just a warrior, and he likes battle, and that's what he was born for. He doesn't have the joy for it as much as the Drax in the movies, which is one of the things that's really fun about Drax in the movies, but it's interesting to read a character that has that part of that personality, but doesn't have the childlike aspects of Drax, where or what kind of read that way anyway. He's not a dum-dum like Drax is kind of played a little bit, especially in the movies, especially in the second one, where I think it goes a little bit too far with that stuff. But also, he doesn't have the literal thing, where he takes everything completely literally and he doesn't get metaphor. That's totally made up for the movies. And so this is a Drax that seems a little bit more capable, a little more with it, and kind of knows what he's doing more. And I like him a lot in this. And then who am I leaving out? So you got Peter Quill, you got Drax, Gamora, Rocket Raccoon, Groot. Those are the main ones. And then Yondu's not here because Yondu is one of the original Guardians. So we actually do see him in a panel when we... Or maybe he even shows up in the future, because there's a part where we go to the future and we see the future Guardians, and at the rate I'm going, this might actually end up at an hour, just because there's so much to talk about. But anyway, I think he might actually show up in that place, but he's a very different character. He's characterized totally differently than he is in the movies. But anyway, he's not going to be regularly on this team because he's from the future. And then you do have Mantis, and Mantis is a totally different character, and she's treated here... and she's also very different from the Mantis that I have heard described from the 70s, but I've never read anything with her in that. But she seemed a little bit, from what I've heard, because I've never read that, like maybe more kind of duplicitous or something. In this, she is pretty much just a straight up hero with telepathy. And she's not quirky and silly like she is in the movies. She's played as one of the main characters in this, or at least one of the main team members, and also pretty capable and could lead this team if they wanted her to. And then you have a couple of kind of throwaway characters that are added as we go along. There's Bug, who seems to exist just to say that he doesn't belong there, and like or for people to tell him, why are you here? He doesn't really have any great powers to speak of. He's just like an alien-looking guy. We don't do a ton with him. He's occasionally fun comic relief, but he's sort of pointless. And then you have another character that's sort of like that, named... is it Jack Flag? Not to be confused with Rick Flag from Suicide Squad. And Jack Flag is here to hate cosmic things and to sort of ground it for the reader in like Earth terms to a degree, but more, I think, to kind of just cover Abnett and Lanning's bases whenever things get so weird and out there and even confusing, so that he can say what the reader is probably saying. Oh my god, I'm so sick of Cosmic, I hate Cosmic, and then you're covering your bases. Then you just go, see, look, we're self-aware about it, and the book doesn't have to completely make sense. We've got this guy that knows it doesn't. And it's funny, but there are places where it really does feel a little bit like a cop-out. And I also should mention that at the beginning, Adam Warlock is also on this team. And later on, he's going to get written out and then become the bad guy. There's a dark version of him that takes over later, and it's all Phyla-Vel's fault. Phyla-Vel being the daughter of Mar-Vell, who keeps changing her superhero name. At the beginning of this, she's Quasar. Later on, when she rescues Moondragon, she changes it to Martyr, which seems like a really terrible idea, and a lot of characters tell her that through this, where it's like, that sounds prophetic. You shouldn't call yourself that. And then the way that pays off is really interesting, because it's not quite the way I thought it would. She's sort of a martyr, but it's more of just like a really tragic character. But again, don't want to get too horribly ahead of myself. So we discover early on that there's supposed to be not a mole, but there's going to be a traitor in this group. And this is one of my big complaints about this book. And I have another major complaint that's part of this, so I'll talk about this here. Very early, because like I said, we have 3 telepaths. You've got, I think Moondragon is one of them, and then you have Cosmo, who is the telepathic cosmonaut dog with a Russian accent, or at least he speaks telepathically with a Russian accent. And he and Rocket don't get along, and they don't know why. That plays for great comedy. It's really funny through the book. I always heard that, but I never knew why. And then I read this, and they don't either. They're just kind of natural enemies. He's dog, and Rocket's a raccoon, and they just cannot bring themselves to get along because they're naturally born enemies. There's a lot of kind of nature-nurture stuff like that in this, where it's like, can you fight your DNA? And that's one of the more comedic versions of that. But anyway, so we're told by Mantis, who also gets premonitions of the future, that's also played for some comedy mileage, that there's gonna be a traitor down the road, and we're told 9 months from now is when it's going to happen, and this book more or less plays in real time. So it feels kind of gimmicky later, because it's like, we want you to be constantly looking for a traitor, and the big mystery is, who is that going to end up being? And I don't care for that even out the gate. I really don't like what's done with it. But even before that, I prefer to just do a story about a traitor and don't immediately be like, she's got to be suspicious of everybody because there's going to be a traitor. I mean, I guess you could do something interesting story-wise with that, right? If, like, one of the other telepaths read that in her mind and then spread it to everybody, and she's like, I didn't want anybody to know that because now everybody's going to be all worried about it and trying to figure out who it is. So, I don't know, maybe you could do something interesting with it. As I always say, you can make anything work, you just have to make it work, so I don't want to just immediately say it's a bad idea in principle. It's a bad idea in premise. But I don't care for what's done with it. So, immediately after that, it just plays like teasing the audience for no good reason. The second arc is about secret invasion with the Skrulls. And one of my complaints about this book, too, I should mention, is that it's only 25 issues, and it has to weave in and out of events constantly. And, like, right away, I say second arc, maybe it's even in the first, very quickly we jump into Secret Invasion with the Skrulls. And so right away, it's like one of our characters is not who they say they are. And I'm like, okay, but I know there's not a traitor yet because you said it was going to be 9 months from now. So it's almost like you were hoping that I would remember part of that, but not the rest of it. And then there's a red herring traitor outside of the Skrull thing. So it's not, the traitor is supposed to actually be a real Guardian. They're not called the Guardians of the Galaxy yet. I'll talk later on, if I remember it, about why they're called that. But there's the question of who is at some point going to be the traitor, but there's also just Skrulls that are masquerading on Nowhere as our characters. And Nowhere, of course, just like in the movies, is a celestial head where the Guardians have their headquarters, except here it's, I guess there it's also sort of this, it's like this living and breathing ecosystem. It's a it's like a whole society of people, and Cosmo, I should have mentioned, is the chief of security of that of that community, and there's a whole couple of issues that deal with the politics of Nowhere and whether or not the governing body there really wants the Guardians to be there, and how they're kind of breaking the rules and they're causing problems, and they keep bringing their problems to Nowhere, and should they even be allowed to work out of there. There's also this other team of Guardians-like characters that they feud with later called the Luminaries, I think. It's all coming back to me. And they start as enemies and then later become friends, and that whole thing is actually really well handled. I love all the stuff in Nowhere and all the kind of local politics of that. It feels very Babylon 5 or Deep Space Nine to me. I really enjoyed that stuff. But anyway, so they're on Nowhere, and the Skrulls have invaded, and we're trying to figure out if any of our characters are Skrulls. And the big question is, well, how in the world are we even going to figure that out? And it turns out that the only way, this is one of my favorite things in the book, but then it leads to a thing I don't care for, is the only way we can find out who the Skrulls are is by killing them. Like, the only way you know that it's a Skrull is if you kill the person, they revert back to being a Skrull. So Drax takes it upon himself, because he's impulsive and he's not scared of anything, doesn't worry about the consequences, like I said before. He decides to kill everyone. And that's how he's going to find out who the Skrulls are. So there's an issue that ends with everybody dying, and then the very next issue, there's a full page, maybe even a couple, like full page spread or like real big panels of just everybody lying around dead. And he's found a way to kill them all and resurrect them in 90 seconds. He stops everybody's hearts and then he starts them again. And when he does that, the Skrulls all revert back, and you can tell which ones are Skrulls. So for a second, it felt like it was teasing us, going, well, so you knew there was going to be a traitor, and now there's Skrulls, and then it was like, oh, Drax is the traitor. Well, no, he's not. He had this very like admittedly extreme and unorthodox way of figuring this out, but he actually did it to help everybody. And so that's what I didn't like about that, is just kind of teasing us about who that's going to be. And also, when we get to the traitor finally, and I'll talk here in a minute about what exactly she does, it's Phyla Vell. When we get to her being a traitor, it's not that big of a surprise, because I don't know if I was supposed to be, but I felt myself kind of unsure of her from the beginning. I was suspicious of her right away, and then it just becomes like really clear that she's gonna be the traitor even before it happens. So anyway, but that whole thing with Drax is hilarious, and one of the things that reminds me most of the movies, that feels like a plot point the movies would do, and with that character, or maybe Rocket. I could also see Rocket in the movies doing that. But that's where it feels most like Guardians. Tone-wise, it is not as far off from the movies as I might have expected it to be, because Gunn has a real specific comedic sensibility that is not entirely exactly like anybody else's, and he's not that far off from what Abnett and Lanning's sensibilities are. This is not a comedy through and through, and I don't feel like at least the first Guardians movie is like comedy being propelled by plot. Like, I feel like most of the comedy comes from the events, and when the characters are cracking jokes and doing funny things, it's in character and it makes sense for the story, and we're not having to like force all that stuff. And this reads that way too. It's just a little bit more serious and in places a little bit more dire than those movies have allowed themselves to go. But it's not as far off as I would have expected. There are a few places where I'm like, that feels right out of a Gunn script. And that was fun. About halfway through, I started putting on the Guardians soundtrack while I was reading this, and they go together like bacon and eggs. A couple of things that the movies may or may not have gotten straight from this that I wanted to mention. One of them is there's a really scary group in this that pushes a lot of the story along, and they're the Church of Universal Truth, and they is it Universal Truth or no I'm sorry, not Universal Truth, of Life, the Universal Church of Life, that's what it is, and they worship life, and they believe, and whenever they say they believe, they get astronomical superpowers. And so they're able to, there's a lot of like literalizing abstract concepts in this. And this is of course a universe, and we're gonna play with this a lot more in the arc that actually finishes a lot of this, or excuse me, the miniseries that finishes a lot of this, which is a Thanos Imperative, which I've now read because I reviewed this and then lost the file, didn't realize I lost the file, read Thanos Imperative while this was still fresh in my mind, reviewed that, made that video, and then had to come back and do this. So I now retroactively am doing this knowing where all of that goes, and that will be a separate video that I made when I thought that I still had that first video made. Is everybody with me? Okay, so I have made that too, and I made it today, so I'll be wearing the same outfit and everything. Anyway, so, the Universal Church of Truth, they worship, or excuse me, the Universal Church of Life. They fly around in big temple ships, and their ships run on belief. And because again, we're literalizing these abstract concepts and turning them into something tangible. And they at first look like they're after Adam Warlock, and then later on they end up worshiping an entity that comes from what will become known as the Cancerverse, which is what the Thanos Imperative is going to be all about, and that is a universe where there is no death. And they're after Adam Warlock initially because he is the avatar of life, and so they look at him as unto a god. But then there's a xenomorph that comes over from the Cancerverse, and by the way, I thought xenomorph was like a copyrighted thing from Alien, but apparently not, and it sort of looks like an alien. It does a lot of things like the alien does. But anyway, they will end up worshiping it. It takes over one of our characters. Is it Moondragon, I think? And they kidnap her, and they're waiting for basically the alien to come out, the xenomorph to come out, because it's supposed to be their god. But anyway, so I think the race that's in Guardians 2, that they steal the batteries from at the beginning, that seem to be real religious, and then in the after credit scene, they reveal that they've got Adam Warlock like in stasis. I think they're supposed to be based on these guys, or they remind me a lot of them, certainly. And then the other thing, story-wise, that seems to be taken potentially right out of this, but I'm not sure, is actually not even in a Guardians movie. The Secret Invasion issue with those Skrulls turn out to be good guy Skrulls, just like the reveal, spoiler alert, in Captain Marvel. And I wonder if that's where they got that, or if there is also a story in Captain Marvel that does something like that. I have no idea. After the first couple of arcs, the Guardians find out that Peter Quill lied to them, and basically, or like kind of like mind violated them in order to get the group together. He thought it was so important to make this group, and it also seems like a lot of that is just, again, selfish insecurities, where, like, is it really as much about saving the universe as it is about just Peter Quill getting to be in charge of something and feeling important? He has that same thing that Peter Quill in the first Guardians movie has, too, right? Where he's, like, where he expects everybody to have heard of him, and he treats himself like a major superhero or a major player on the galactic stage. He does that here, too. And he's so insecure and unsure if these, if his friends will follow him, that he gets Mantis to telepathically put the notion in their head that this is a good idea, and to want to be part of this team. So it was none of their ideas in the first place. He didn't just ask them and they said yes. They were predisposed to want to because of suggestion. And most everybody leaves after that. They get upset with Peter Quill, and then they're splintered through most of this book. The actual team that is built at the beginning is only together for like 6 issues or 9 issues, and then back together again, most of them during the Thanos Imperative. But before that, it's a kind of a bunch of splintered groups. There's going to be a period way later where we think half of them are dead, and then it turns out that they're not dead, and they were off on another like covert mission on their own. But during this period where everybody's angry with Quill, that's where we all go to a couple different kinds of hells, and you've got Rocket putting together part of the team, like, makeshift, and everybody else just doesn't want to be involved anymore. And it's weird the way it's handled, because, first of all, I just don't 100% understand why Peter Quill felt the need to do that in the first place. I get on the surface of it his personal insecurities, but at no point does anybody go, look, if you just asked us, or at least I don't remember this happening, if you had just asked us, we would have done this. Like we would have come together with you, Peter Quill. Like, all you had to do was have a little bit more confidence in yourself and in us. Nobody does that. They just kind of do the, like, really generic, typical TV thing, the kind of entitled thing of, like, woe is me, you've hurt my feelings, we're not even going to have a conversation. I'm not saying what he did was right, but it's just weird there's not really a conversation. They all just kind of splinter off and go. Again, is how I remember it, having read it a couple of weeks ago now. And the other thing that's really, because later on when they all come back together, I get the sense that they like being together, that like, they're not like a family yet, like they become in the movies, but none of these characters feel like as soon as that suggestion, if it were to wear off, or when they find out it's a suggestion, they're like, oh my god, I never would have done this. They're just upset because Peter wasn't straight with them, that's all. So I don't buy that he's so insecure that he wouldn't have at least noodled that. And then the other thing is, nobody has any problem with Mantis. She's the one who actually did it. And if memory serves, I think she's on that smaller team that Rocket puts together. Nobody gives her any crap about it at all. It's almost like, well, if someone comes to you and asks you to do something really unethical, you should always do it because you're their friend, and you're not to be held responsible at all because it was their idea in the first place. That's really how it reads. I don't like that at all. I do not get why nobody is complaining about Mantis with that. But anyway, so then you've got the kind of double descent into hell, and later on, everybody comes back, and there's just a couple of like little missions that happen there. And like I said, Peter Quill faces in kind of his own personal arch nemesis in Blaster. I think that's where the Blaster thing happens. And then you've got bringing Moondragon back, who has been eaten by an actual dragon, like this big, scary cosmic dragon. And we get her back, but at a massive price. We find out later that Phyla-Vell has made a deal with the devil, basically. And she can have Moondragon back if she promises later to kill the Avatar of Life, who is Adam Warlock. And so later on, she will do that, and that's when all hell's going to break loose, and reality is going to start unraveling. And so, I should mention, by the way, let me back off for a second and say, there are bits during this where I'm not trusting that everything that's been established earlier is going to come back. I'm having a hard time telling if I'm reading one big ongoing story or kind of a bunch of separate adventures, and I start really enjoying it more once I can trust that everything's going to pay off in some way, or at least most things are going to pay off. And if this book had been allowed to go as long as it looks like Abnett Lanning wanted it to go, everything probably would have paid off. Like I said, there's a character later on when Adam Warlock becomes Adam Magus. That guy ends up just disappearing at the end when it looks like you would expect a big giant showdown with that character, and instead we reintroduce Thanos at the end. That's the big giant reveal is, oh, Thanos is actually not dead, and if memory serves, the Church of the Universal Church of Life has actually been hanging on to him the whole time, and he's going to be the big linchpin of the big ender story for this, which is the Thanos imperative, where we're going to try to get rid of the Cancerverse using Thanos. He comes back at the end. I'm ahead of myself, but I'll go ahead and do this now. He comes back at the end and wanted to be dead. He had been killed, and he was happy with that, but now he has to come back and try to go to the Cancerverse and stop death from not existing anymore, because he's the only thing we'll find out that can kill life in the Cancerverse. And so it kind of ends up being all about Thanos right at the end, and it's a really cool reveal. I wasn't expecting Thanos, but there's all this this plotting from the Magus, who looks like he wants to try to take over everything, and then that ends up kind of getting dropped after, spoiler alert, Phyla-Vell ends up getting killed by him later. I think by him, I forget. She gets killed in the process of all this. And if memory serves, it will also end up being her fault that Thanos comes back. But I don't know, I don't remember if I'm quite right about that. But the deal with Phyla-Vell is she also has these massive personal insecurities, and she's constantly, kind of like Constantine, trying to make up for past mistakes. And every time she does that, she just makes stuff worse. And she never has enough information before she makes a decision, and she's constantly making decisions for other people. And so it's kind of a cautionary tale with her. But anyway, so the coolest stuff in this is also the most confusing, which is some of the time travel stuff. Like I said, the Guardians from the future are going to be the reason that the Guardians of the Galaxy get their name. But we're also going to treat it like this was always the first Guardians team, which doesn't make a lot of sense because I guess it's paradoxical. They had to get their name from the future, but that future had to have existed before they even got the idea, because a character named Major Victory comes back in time. And that's not to be confused with the Major Victory from Who Wants to Be a Superhero, Stan Lee's reality show, where apparently he didn't realize that Major Victory was a, albeit minor, Marvel Comics character, and allowed that guy to use that name. And hilariously, this book starts a year after the first season of that show, or like directly after that first season. But anyway, so Major Victory comes back in time. And he has amnesia, but it's very selective amnesia. It's a lot like Spawn, where like certain things will start to come to him as time goes on. And he knows that the name of his team was the Guardians of the Galaxy, but he doesn't know much more beyond that. And Peter Quill basically is like, it sounds like a great name, we should use that. And then they do, and that's why they're called the Guardians of the Galaxy. Which is kind of not entirely an accurate name for them, because what they're guarding is actually bigger than the galaxy, right? Like, they're more about, like, oddly, the characters from the future are more about just their reality, it seems like, although I've never read that stuff. They are going to deal a lot with time travel stuff in this, but I don't know if that's the case in their book. And the ones that do in this are like splintered off versions, again, from realities that no longer exist. So Major Victory is going to come back and be like, I'm very confused, I don't know where I am. They find him in this is one of the kind of fun super science, like, absurd ideas in this. He gets thawed out of time ice. And in the first issue, if memory serves, the first issue that ends with his shield frozen in time ice. And if you don't know anything about Guardians of the Galaxy, you're probably thinking, oh, Captain America again? Is this like some other version of Captain America? And then it will turn out that it's this guy from the future, from the other Guardians team, who I had seen him enough on covers to know that that was a member of that team, but I didn't know his name. I didn't realize he was Major Victory, my favorite actor, or I guess contestant in Who Wants to Be a Superhero, who got knocked off third and really deserved to win that. This guy has has the Captain America shield, and I guess it survived that long, and he got to have it for some reason. And so he gets thawed out in time ice and is explaining what little he understands. And then later, like I said, this woman named Starhawk, I think it's Starhawk, comes back and reveals that she is one who knows. Like, she's got not cosmic awareness, but like she understands that she's from another timeline that has been wiped out, and she's lost in time and space, and is not and does not have a home to go back to. And so she is warning them that there's going to be some kind of cosmic event that causes all that. Precisely the kind of thing that they're trying to stop. And the idea is, let me also mention that the one who knows thing is weird, because consistently, for issues and issues and issues, she refers to herself as one who knows. And then later it turns into the one who knows, and then it alternates back and forth, and I don't know if that's on purpose or if they just forgot about the article adjective. That sounds like a super minor thing, but I only noticed it because it never went to the, and it was almost like there was a point being made out of, I am one who knows. There are maybe others. I'm not the one who knows, and then later she's the one who knows. So I don't know, but I wanted to mention that. She used to be a man, now she's a woman for some reason. And then later on, that thing is going to happen, and our characters are going to get sent to the future and actually deal with the Guardians there, and then they're going to get some help from Kang, who's only in one issue, and helps to kind of set things right and fix the timeline, and then the Adamegus thing happens, and then the Fault thing happens with the Cancerverse. So that's kind of the order of events. And all of the stuff with like the future unraveling and all of that gets real creative and is a lot of fun to read, even if I don't always know what exactly is going on, but I really enjoyed that stuff. But the idea with the Guardians seems to be that this is both a team that will be really important, at least for like legacy and stuff. They're gonna matter, and they sort of kind of seem to inspire the later team that they are named after, because in the very last issue, they seem to have stopped all the unraveling of time, and the Guardians in the future are kind of celebrating the fact that their timeline has been restored, but they can't be sure that it will always stay that way. And that's weird because of the way you'd think a linear timeline would work, where things would happen instantaneously. But I'm a little fuzzy on how exactly the time travel is supposed to work in this, and I don't want to think about it too hard, because I'm not totally sure that Abnett and Lanning know, and I don't know how much that it's really the point. But before all of that, the Guardians are kind of a bunch of screw-ups, or at least as a team they seem to be. And of course, thematically, this book is about teamwork and family to some degree, and the idea is when they're not working as a team, things get really bad, but also just certain of them are not especially competent by themselves. And so we have two splintered teams that both lose simultaneously, which ends up creating Adamegus and causing all these horrible things to happen in the future. So this is the other big event that this goes into, which is called War of the Kings, or the War of Kings. And I don't know as much about that war as I would if I read all the other matter surrounding it, because reading this book is like reading a unimportant side book. It didn't sell super well. That's why it got canceled prematurely. that goes into events I don't care about. And so I have to read in this book about an event that I'm not looking at the other things of. I don't think there was like a War of Kings mini. I think it was one of those events that went through a bunch of different books, but it has to do with Attilan, the Inhumans, and it has to do with the Kree and the Shi'ar. And the Kree and the Shi'ar are at war for whatever reason, and Attilan is involved for whatever reason, and we have two groups that each go to both sides of this in order to try to stop the war, and neither of them succeed. And because those negotiations don't end up working out, you end up with this big weapon that is made by Black Bolt that ends up causing a rift-creating event, a cosmic, tear in space-time kind of event, and that's what ends up messing up the future and causes Starhawk to go from man to woman and all those sorts of things to happen. I think is what's going on, and then in the middle of all of that, you have Phyla-Vell turning against the team and killing Adam Warlock and creating Adam Megas, and he also is involved in all of that. And so what ends up happening is, even after we get done with the War of the King stuff, we think, because in the future reality has gotten so messed up that we kind of lose that timeline completely. We think that all those characters have died, and somehow or rather they haven't, and they're like disembodied entities for a while, and then they end up being okay, and I don't remember exactly what's going on with that, but nobody actually dies during that. We actually really are coming up on an hour, so I'm going to go ahead and end here, but let me just say, I enjoyed this a lot. I'm really glad I read it. I'm glad I read all of it before I started talking about it, because I would have been more down on it before I saw where some of it was going. I like it even more after reading Thanos Imperative, so I'm glad I did that. These 25 issues are not a story in and of themselves. There is some resolution that happens at the end, but you really do need Thanos Imperative. It still doesn't feel completely over, but that's true of a lot of comic series, because these are characters that are, going to be used again down the road. It definitely, of course, reads like a book that never expects these characters to become super popular like they are now, and it's a run that really was deserving of that, of that adaptation, of that treatment, and I'm glad that happened, because there are things here and there that I like more about this book. I like that it goes, it's of course more cosmic than the movies, and it allows itself to go to some crazier places than those have so far, but a couple of characters, in particular Peter Quill, are more fleshed out and more fully formed in the films, and I like him more there. But anyway, so those are my thoughts. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have read this, let me know what you think about it in the comments, and thanks a lot for putting up with my ramblings. I really thought, it being so long since I read this, I would not have talked this long, but I did, almost exactly the same amount of time. I guess that's just how long it takes to talk about 25 issues at once when there's this much stuff going on. But anyway, thanks so much for watching, folks. Sure appreciate it, and I will see you again next time on the Comic Vault. Bye, guys.